Hi, Misha here, and we continue on with Hobby Master Week around here. And probably one that you've spotted in the background of the last videos. It's time to talk about the Sukhoi SU-25. In the past, we've looked at the original Russian SU-25 and the upgraded SU-25SM that's been used by the post-Soviet Russians. But this is the Ukrainian SU-25M1, their update of the SU-25 original model. This is the single-seat version. They also updated some of the two-seat 25UBs. And the Hobby Master just does a really good job with their Sukhois. And their MiGs, for that matter, but really their Sukhois. And this is an interesting aircraft. Not a lot of differences in the model, except for the paint scheme, but we'll point out a few things and check it out. I'm just a sucker for these, and the original release was going for crazy money, so the fact that they did kind of a re-release of this is pretty neat. So, we'll dive in. I decided to begin with this in kind of a clean state. A little change of pace. The idea here, this is a ground attacker, but basically this is a Warthog. This is their A-10. I mean, it's a different plane, but the concept's the same. A close air support aircraft that can carry a lot of, at the time, dumb, just, drop ordnance, rockets, iron bombs, but can take hits from, small arms and even light AA. Now, there was to be a jet-powered close air support aircraft back in the 50s called the IL-40, the IL-40. It was to replace the World War II era IL-2 and IL-10, but this was canceled. For a while, they kind of tried to make other aircraft do this role, but by the late 60s, they realized it just wasn't happening. They needed something. So in 69, there were trials starting off, and it was basically the big makers, Yak, Ilyushin, MiG, and of course Sukhoi. And Sukhoi would win with the T-8, which was a twin-engine, armored-up aircraft, but still rather conventional and easy to mass-produce. Had a good bit of armor, including an armored cockpit, often called a bathtub cockpit. 2 engines with armor around them, so even if one was shot out, it had a second one. Big straight wings, armored landing gear, what have you. It wasn't a speed demon. In fact, it was only able to get over 600 miles per hour sometimes. So certainly subsonic. Max altitude, 23,000 feet tops. So, but it had range and endurance. That's where it could do. It could also carry a large payload of about 9,700 pounds. And it had 11 hard points, but to be fair, under the wings, each there were 5, plus 1 of the center. Usually 2 of the inner pylons, they were plumbed. They were always taken up with fuel tanks for range. And the 2 outer pylons were really only good for air-to-air missiles, short-range ARMs, like the K-13, later the R-60, R-73. And those are just for self-defense. So, practically speaking, it had 7 hard points, but still, not bad. It also had a 30mm cannon with 250 rounds, so it could do some strafing. And it did have a laser rangefinder and some other somewhat advanced electronics. But production was slowed. Instead of building these in Russia proper, they were built in Georgia, part of the Soviet Union at the time. And the first Georgian assembled Sukhoi example was 1979, and these were kind of rushed into the field for the Afghanistan War, 1980-1981, and they became quite important there. And interesting times there. They were also used extensively by Iraq. But in 1991, with the breakup of the USSR, Russia would end up with about 250. And Ukraine would get 80. Now, they only built about 1,000 of these. Not a huge number, but not tiny. And Ukraine would get the original SU-25 and the SU-25UB, which, while it was a 2-seat trainer, was fully combat capable. And these would be in the Ukrainian Air Force. Well, Russia started a program to upgrade theirs to the SM standard in the late 90s, with the first few aircraft ready around 2006. Then they had around 30 available in 2012, 2013, and thus they were used in the Crimea thing in 2014 and onwards. Of course, they're being replaced by the SU-34 these days, but they're still around. But Ukraine still had theirs, and they started an upgrade program around 2008 with the first examples delivered in 2010. By 2013, 10 examples had been delivered, and they named it the SU-25M1. And that's what we have here. And taking it off its stand, you'll see right away one of the things that Ukraine started doing, and this is for a lot of their aircraft, was going to this new pixel camo scheme. That's become the new standard. That's one reason I wanted to show it to you clean. Oops, antenna. On the underside here too. Other updates were pretty standard. GPS, a new radio, new communications, a new digital flight recorder, and a new targeting aiming system for more precise delivery of the ordnance. As well as just kind of midlife service updates of the existing airframes. Luckily, these were built extremely tough. And they would have the ability to use the S-13 rocket for the first time for the Ukrainian examples. So not major updates, but noteworthy. And they were done in Ukraine by a Ukrainian company. And they were available, at least in limited numbers, for the Crimea thing. In fact, that's where this model's from, and it was one that was shot down. Ukraine lost a handful in the summer of 2014 in July and August. And of course, they've continued to see use in recent times for pretty obvious reasons, and they're being used on both sides. This model is pretty nice. It's a hopeful metal wing. The tail is plastic, because it's so thin, but the fuselage is metal, at least until you get to the detailing like the tubes. You have a single piece gear, which is nice. I feel like that's an improvement on the earlier patterns. I feel like the earlier ones had a little more complicated gear, but maybe I'm misremembering models. These did have extensive chaff and flare launchers for self-defense. Kind of nice. The canopy changed a little bit over time too. We have our guy in there in the really deep-seated cockpit. My only gripe is this canopy isn't held on real tight. Sitting on a shelf is not going to go anywhere, but if you turn it upside down, it has a propensity to fall out. So sometimes I use just a tiny bit of blue tack in the holes to hold it in, just in case, you don't want to flip it over when you're, say, installing gear or the ordnance and it go MIA. And here are all your slots. Of course, your center one is usually taken up by your stand, although you can plug that hole right there. And we have ours here. Again, the outboards will be for self-defense missiles, and the inboards will be for fuel tanks, meaning the middle three are for your ordnance. So with that, let's arm this up and let you see it in full gear and glory. So here it is loaded up. Everything plugs in quite easily. The only ones that are a little loose are the fuel tanks, and I think it's just because of how big they are. Some of them you can plug in a few places, others are kind of, depending on the slot size, stuck one way or the other. And here it is on the spinny thing with the ordnance on, just to show you. I mean, it's pretty loaded down. Like I said, up to nearly 10,000 pounds, but a good chunk of that's going to be fuel, and you have to have the missiles for defense, but theoretically, I guess you could skip the fuel tanks if you really wanted to. And a lot of it's just armor. I mean, it's an armored up aircraft, not all that big of an aircraft, frankly, but well armored. And to be fair, it did sort of predate the A-10, although they're actually pretty close in eras and service and all that. And like the A-10, a flying tank doesn't really get outdated like maybe a frontline jet fighter or penetration bomber would. And it's interesting that they've been on both sides of the conflict for a decade nearly now. And there was an export variant known as the SU-25K that went to places like Iraq. But most of them were kept within the Soviet Union because they needed them for Afghanistan. So what do you think of this Ukrainian paint scheme? We have looked at an SU-27M1 from them before and long ago, and it had a somewhat similar scheme. Seems to be a popular one from Hobbymaster. And there we have it. We did a very modern French jet. We did a Canadian/American from the Cold War. We did a World War II American. Now a Soviet/Ukrainian. And this is a flying tank, or maybe even a tank killer. So we'll end the week with a tank itself, but that will be next time. I would actually like it if they would do the UB version two-seater, but that would require a new mold, so I don't know if they're going to. But at least they have done about 8 of these so far. Which one do you like? The old Afghan war, the new Russian style, or the Ukrainian paint scheme? Let me know in the comments. This is Misha. Catch you very soon next time.